The mark on her wrist started to burn when the Alpha King walked in. It was here in the shadow of the kingdom's looming castle that Alara lived. She was a healer, known to tend to the sick and wounded, though few truly knew her. Beneath her sleeves, hidden from the eyes of strangers, was a mark, a small, intricate symbol on her wrist that sometimes burned with a fire she could neither explain nor control. Alara had learned to live with the mark. She had learned to hide it, to ignore the searing pain that sometimes flared when the world seemed too large or too cruel. Yet tonight, as the storm raged and the village huddled beneath thatched roofs, the mark on her wrist flared with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She knelt over a wounded man in her small, candle-lit hut, pressing cloths over his cuts, murmuring words she didn't fully understand herself. The storm battered the walls and the candle flickered as if warning her. Then it happened. The mark burned, hotter than ever before. Alara gasped, jerking her wrist from the air as though the fire might consume her. The man looked up at her, fear wide in his eyes. What is happening?" he stammered. Alara didn't answer. She barely understood it herself. The mark had never burned like this before, not with such strength, such hunger. It was as though something unseen, something powerful and ancient, was calling out through her skin. Then from the darkness outside came a sound she would never forget, the heavy, commanding steps of a man. They were slow, deliberate, and filled with a strength that seemed to push the storm back if only slightly. Alara froze. Something in her chest told her that she was no longer alone, that the mark had done more than awaken on its own. It had drawn him. The door burst open with a force that rattled the walls. Rainwater splashed into the room. And there he stood, tall, imposing, cloaked in black, with eyes like storm clouds that seemed to see right through her. He was the Alpha King, Kale, ruler of the kingdom and master of secrets that people whispered about in fear. The stories said he was unyielding, dangerous, and irresistible, and now he was here in her small hut, looking at her with a curiosity that made her heart tremble. "Alara," he said, his voice low but sharp, commanding attention. "The mark, it burns." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The mark pulsed on her wrist, a bright, fiery glow against her pale skin. Her fingers trembled as she instinctively covered it. "You cannot hide it," Kale said, stepping closer. The air seemed to shift as he moved. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, drawn toward him. "It is mine to see, mine to claim or to destroy." Alara's heart pounded. Fear and fascination clashed in her chest. She had always been careful, always hidden. And now the Alpha King, the ruler whose power rivaled the storms themselves, had found her. I don't understand," she whispered. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in focus, as though he could read her very thoughts. "You will," he said. "The mark is not just on your skin. It is tied to you, to me, to a destiny neither of us yet fully knows." The storm outside intensified, lightning splitting the sky. Alara felt the mark flare even hotter and she cried out, clutching her wrist. The pain was sharp but also strange. It was a fire that called to something deep within her, a memory she could not name, a song she could not remember. Kale extended a hand, slow, deliberate, and she wanted to pull back, but something in her did not allow it. Something in her core knew that if she moved away, the storm outside would not be the only danger. "This mark," Kale said, his voice almost tender now, "is part of a chain that binds your fate to mine. You cannot run from it, Alara, nor can I." Her breath caught. The name of the king, spoken so directly, was both frightening and thrilling. She wanted to ask how he knew her name, but she knew better than to speak while the fire burned. The mark flared once more, hotter than before, and she felt an invisible pull toward him as if some unseen force tethered them together. "Why me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why now?" Kale knelt, lowering his head closer to her level, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because the kingdom trembles and only the mark can save it, and because you are the one who can bear it." Alara swallowed, confusion and fear twisting inside her. She had never thought of herself as someone who could bear anything of importance. She had only wanted to heal, to live quietly. Yet here was a man, a king, telling her that her hidden mark, her hidden fire was the key to everything. "Save it or destroy it," she whispered. Kale's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment she saw the man beneath the legend. The Alpha King, the ruler feared by all, looked human, vulnerable, and yet more dangerous than the storms outside. "That," he said, "depends on you." The storm outside raged. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the room in brief, blinding flashes. In each flash, the mark glowed brighter, as though the fire within her was answering him. Alara felt a surge of power, terrifying and exhilarating. It was as if the mark had chosen its moment, chosen him, chosen her. And she realized with both awe and fear that her life had changed forever. "You must come with me," Kale said, rising to his full, imposing height. "The court, the castle, the kingdom itself. It is all tied to what burns on your wrist. If you stay here, the mark will consume more than just you. It will awaken forces you cannot fight alone." Alara's eyes darted to the doorway. She could see the storm outside, the trees bending under the wind, the village in chaos. She could see her quiet life waiting beyond these walls, and yet she could not move. Something rooted her to the spot, a mixture of fear and fascination that made her chest ache. You frighten me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Good," he said. "Fear sharpens the senses. It makes the heart aware of what is real. And what is real, Alara, is this mark and us." The words settled in the room like a spell. Alara felt the pull stronger now, the invisible tether tightening between her and the king. Her hand trembled as she touched her wrist, feeling the burn, feeling the heat, feeling the power. And in that moment she understood that nothing would ever be the same. A sudden crash of lightning illuminated the doorway, and Kale stepped forward, extending his hand once more. "Come," he said. "There is no time to waste. Every moment you linger, the mark grows stronger and the shadows grow bolder. If we do not act, the kingdom may fall before you even learn your power." Alara hesitated. Fear screamed at her to refuse, to hide, to run. Yet something deeper, something she could not name, whispered that she had already been chosen, that her path had always led here. Slowly she placed her hand in his, the warmth of his palm steadying her, grounding her. As her fingers closed around his, the mark blazed brighter than ever before, sending sparks of fire dancing across the room. The wounded man in the corner gasped, staring at the unnatural glow. Outside, the storm seemed to pause, as if the world itself held its breath. Kale looked down at her wrist, then into her eyes, his own glowing with a mixture of awe and determination. "Do you feel it?" he asked. Alara nodded, unable to speak, the heat of the mark coursing through her like a living thing. And in that instant she knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a healer on the edge of the kingdom. She was the bearer of a power that could save or destroy a realm. The Alpha King stepped back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then we begin," he said. And with that he led her into the storm, out into the wild unknown where destiny awaited. The mark on her wrist burned brighter than ever, a beacon in the night, a promise and a warning. And somewhere deep inside, Alara felt the stirrings of a fire that could not be tamed, one that would bind her to the Alpha King in ways she could not yet understand. And so, beneath the roaring skies and the echoing thunder, their journey began. The castle of the Alpha King loomed on a hill, dark against the stormy sky. Its tall towers seemed to pierce the clouds, and the walls were etched with the scars of old battles. Inside, the air smelled of burning torches and cold stone. Alara had never seen a place so grand, so intimidating, and so full of shadows that seemed almost alive. Kale led her through the massive halls, his hand still holding hers lightly, though she could feel the strength behind his grip. Every step echoed on the stone floor, a reminder of the power he commanded and the weight of the kingdom he ruled. Alara tried to keep her breathing steady. She had left her quiet village behind, and now she was surrounded by the unknown, the dangerous, and the extraordinary. Where? Where are we going? She asked, her voice small compared to the cavernous halls. To the court, Kale said simply. You must be presented not as a stranger but as the one who carries the mark. Alara swallowed hard. The mark, her mark, she had only ever hidden it, feared it, yet here it was the key to everything. And now the whole court would see it. She felt a wave of panic rise inside her. You mean everyone will see it, she whispered. Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable yet softer than before. They must see it. The mark is not just a symbol, it is power, and power must be acknowledged. Her heart pounded as they reached the great doors of the court. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long, dancing shadows. Guards and courtiers stopped and stared as Kale entered first, with Alara following. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some eyes were wide with awe, others with suspicion. Every gaze made her skin prickle and the mark burned hotter as if reacting to their presence. Kale's voice echoed across the hall. This is Alara, he announced, the bearer of the mark. She comes with a power that may decide the fate of our kingdom. The room fell silent. A few people exchanged worried glances, but most simply stared, captivated by her presence. Alara could feel their fear and curiosity pressing against her, but she forced herself to stand tall. She would not be broken by their stares. A counselor, an older man with sharp eyes and a long gray beard, stepped forward. The mark, it burns with the light of the old magic, he said slowly. If what the king says is true, then the fate of the kingdom may indeed rest on her shoulders. Alara's stomach twisted. The weight of destiny pressed down on her like a mountain. She had only wanted to help people, to heal the sick, to live quietly. She had never wanted to be the center of power, never wanted to be responsible for the kingdom. Kale, sensing her fear, stepped closer, his presence both comforting and commanding. You will not face this alone, he said quietly, so that only she could hear. I will guide you. You will learn to control the mark, to use it to protect the kingdom. Alara's eyes met his. There was something in them, a fire beneath the shadows, a promise of strength, and perhaps something more. She did not fully understand what it was yet, but it stirred something deep inside her, something she could not ignore. The days that followed were filled with lessons, rituals, and strange tests. Alara was taught to control the mark, to call its fire without being consumed. She practiced in the great halls under Kale's watchful eyes, learning the rhythm of the power within her. At times, the mark would flare uncontrollably, and Kale would step in, steadying her, guiding her hand, his touch light but firm. You must focus, he said one evening as the torches flickered and shadows stretched along the walls. The power is part of you, but it will not obey fear. Only courage and will can guide it. Alara nodded, though her hands trembled. And if I fail? She asked. Kale's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a small smile. Then I will not let you fall. There was a tension between them that neither fully understood. It was not just the power, not just the mark, but something deeper. Something that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter whenever he was near. And Kale was no different. He had never felt anyone challenge him, intrigue him, or awaken something in him like Alara did. She was both dangerous and essential, a spark in the dark he could not ignore. One night, during a ritual to awaken the latent magic in her mark, something went wrong. The flames of her power burst from her wrist, filling the room with a blinding light. Shadows danced along the walls and whispers of long-dead voices filled the hall. Alara cried out, panic rising. She had never felt the mark so alive, so demanding, so sentient. Kale was at her side instantly, his hand steadying hers, guiding the fire back into control. Breathe, he said, his voice calm but firm. It is you. You are the master. Do not let it master you. Alara struggled, her arms shaking, the heat of the mark almost unbearable, and then she felt something, an understanding, a connection. The fire within her responded not to fear, but to trust. Slowly, the flames subsided and the mark glowed softly, almost like a heartbeat. The room was silent, and Alara's chest heaved as she looked up at Kale. He was watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter, his eyes holding a mixture of pride, concern, and something else, something she could not name. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And this bond between us, it will only grow stronger." Alara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, realizing that she could not deny the connection that seemed to pull them together. In the following days, the court grew more curious and more suspicious. Some courtiers whispered behind her back, calling her a witch, a threat, or a pawn. Others looked on with awe, unable to hide their fascination with the mark and the way Kale watched over her. Alara learned to navigate their stares, their whispers, and their judgment. She learned that power often came with fear, and that fear could be more dangerous than any sword. One evening, Kale invited her to walk along the castle terraces. The wind was sharp, the sky streaked with the last light of dusk. The castle stretched beneath them, and in the distance, the village looked like tiny specks against the darkening land. "You are thinking about them," Kale said, his voice breaking the quiet calm like the first note of a song. Alara's lips pressed into a thin line. "They judge me," she said. "I am different, they do not understand." Kale's gaze softened. "Let them judge," he said. "It matters little what the world thinks when you carry something as powerful as you do. They will see your strength soon enough." She looked at him, studying the sharp lines of his face, the storm-gray eyes that seemed to see her entirely. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he saw, what he felt, but the words escaped her. Instead, she felt the unspoken tension, the unspoken connection, and a longing she could neither name nor resist. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew across the terrace, and the mark on her wrist flared brightly. Alara gasped, clutching her wrist instinctively. Kale moved closer, his presence grounding her. "The mark chooses its moments," he said softly. "It is alive and it reacts to the truth between us. Something is coming, Alara, something that will test us both." Her heart skipped a beat. What will happen?" she asked. Kale's expression darkened, the shadows of the terrace seeming to deepen around him. "I do not know," he admitted, "but you must be ready. The court, the kingdom, the very magic of this land, it will all demand more than you realize." Alara swallowed hard, the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. She had never asked for this life. She had never wanted to be more than herself. Yet here she was, tied to the Alpha King, tied to a mark that burned with unknown fire, and tied to a fate she could not escape. As the sky darkened completely and stars blinked through the storm clouds, Alara realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same. She was no longer a healer in a quiet village. She was a bearer of power, a player in a game larger than she could imagine, and someone who had awakened a part of Kale that even he had not known existed. And in that realization, she felt both fear and exhilaration. The Court of Shadows was waiting, the whispers of magic were stirring, and the bond between her and the Alpha King was only beginning to form. The night grew colder, the wind sharper, but the mark on her wrist glowed faintly, like a heartbeat against the darkness, a promise, a warning, and a call to destiny. The wind howled through the cursed forest, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers toward the dark sky. Every shadow seemed alive, moving as though watching those who dared to enter. Alara and Kale stepped carefully along the narrow path, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet ground. Alara's hand hovered near her wrist, where the mark glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The further they went into the forest, the stronger the pull she felt from the mark. It was not just a symbol, It was alive, guiding them towards something unknown, something powerful. Kale walked beside her, silent for most of the journey. The Alpha King's presence was constant and heavy, like the weight of the storm itself. His eyes, gray as clouds before a thunderstorm, scanned the forest with a sharpness that made her shiver. Every now and then he would glance at her, his expression unreadable but always filled with concern. "Do you feel it?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made her stop in her tracks. Alara nodded, her fingers brushing the faint glow of her mark. "Yes," she said. It wants me to go forward, but I don't know what we're looking for." Kale's jaw tightened. "The mark has chosen a path. It is leading us to the artifact that can break the curse on the kingdom. Without it, the shadows will grow stronger, and the magic will consume everything." Alara swallowed hard. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest. She had only wanted to live quietly, to help people, to heal. Yet here she was, walking through a forest that seemed alive with danger, tied to a king she barely understood, and carrying a mark that pulsed with mysterious power. The trees seemed to close in around them as night fell. The moon barely pierced the thick canopy, and the shadows grew longer, darker, and more threatening. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, whispers, rustling leaves, the crack of twigs under unseen feet. Alara's heart raced with fear, but she forced herself to keep moving. Kale's presence beside her was both comforting and unsettling. She had never felt someone so powerful, so commanding, yet there was something in his eyes that made her feel safe despite the danger. Suddenly, a figure stepped from the shadows, a creature formed of smoke and light, its shape shifting and unnatural. Alara gasped, clutching her wrist as the mark flared brightly, burning with intensity. The creature's eyes glowed like embers, and it hissed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. Kale stepped forward instantly, his stance protective and commanding. "Stay behind me," he said. His voice carried authority, and the shadows seemed to hesitate at his command. Alara did as he said, feeling the warmth of his presence at her back. The mark on her wrist pulsed wildly, and she could feel a surge of power within her, responding to the danger. She closed her eyes, focusing on the fire inside, letting it guide her. The creature lunged, and instinctively Alara raised her wrist. A burst of light shot from the mark, hitting the creature. It shrieked, smoke swirling around it, and then it dissolved into the darkness. Alara stumbled, her chest heaving, and Kale caught her before she fell. "You controlled it," he said, his voice low, almost impressed. "The mark obeys you, not the shadows. Remember that." Alara nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She had felt the power coursing through her, terrifying yet exhilarating. She looked at Kale, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something unspoken there, a bond forming in the heat of danger, a connection that neither of them fully understood but could not ignore. They continued deeper into the forest, moving cautiously, aware that more dangers could be lurking in the shadows. The trees seemed to whisper warnings, and the air was thick with magic, both old and restless. The path grew narrower, and the darkness more oppressive. Yet with each step the mark pulsed brighter, guiding them forward, pulling them toward their destiny. As they reached a small clearing, the moon broke through the clouds, illuminating a stone pedestal at its center. Upon it lay a small, intricately carved box. The artifact they had been seeking. Alara's heart leapt, and she instinctively moved toward it, but Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. "Wait," he said. "The magic here is strong. The artifact is protected by forces we may not understand. We must be careful." Alara nodded, her fingers trembling as she reached out. The moment her hand touched the box, the mark on her wrist flared with a brilliant light, and the ground beneath them shook. Shadows rose from the edges of the clearing, forming figures of warriors long dead, bound by the curse that had haunted Kale's family for generations. Kale drew his sword, its blade glinting in the moonlight. "Stand behind me," he commanded. "Do not fear the shadows. They are bound to the curse, not to you." Alara obeyed, focusing on the fire of her mark. She could feel the power within her, a living thing that responded to her thoughts and emotions. As the shadow warriors advanced, she raised her wrist, letting the light guide her. The mark flared again, a brilliant blaze that pushed the shadows back, forcing them to retreat. Kale fought with precision and strength, moving like a storm among the shadows. Yet it was Alara's mark that held the key. The more she trusted it, the stronger it became. She realized with both awe and fear that she and Kale were linked in this fight, their powers working together in a way she could not fully understand. After what felt like hours, the last shadow dissolved, leaving the clearing silent except for their heavy breathing. Alara's chest heaved, sweat mingling with rain on her face. The mark on her wrist pulsed softly now, a gentle reminder of the fire within her. Kale sheathed his sword and stepped closer. "You did well," he said quietly. "Stronger than I imagined." Alara looked at him, feeling the weight of his words in a way that went beyond mere praise. There was something in his eyes, a mix of admiration, concern, and something more. She could not name it, but it made her heart race and her stomach tighten. You didn't have to fight," she said softly. "I could have." "You would have," he interrupted gently, "and I would have been glad of it. But this bond between us, it is more than just survival. It is trust, and you have earned my trust, Alara." Her heart fluttered at his words, the fire of her mark now matched by a fire she felt deep in her chest. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant, but the words seemed too small for the moment, too weak for the emotions swirling between them. Instead, she nodded, understanding without speaking. The night was quiet, but the forest seemed to hum with energy, as if acknowledging the power she now wielded. Kale led her to the pedestal, helping her lift the artifact. It was light in her hands, yet heavy with magic, humming as if alive. The mark on her wrist pulsed in response, and she felt a connection, a promise of what was to come. As they made their way back through the forest, the path seemed less threatening, the shadows less alive. Yet the pull of destiny was strong, and Alara knew that the journey was far from over. The mark burned softly, a reminder of the power she carried and the bond forming between her and the Alpha King. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The village below was peaceful, unaware of the night's events, unaware of the fire that now lived within Alara. She looked at Kale, standing beside her, and realized that she had changed. She was no longer just a healer. She was a bearer of power, a force in her own right, and someone who had awakened something in the king she could not yet name. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable yet filled with intensity. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The court, the kingdom, the shadows, all will test us, and the bond between us, it will be tested too." Alara swallowed, feeling both fear and excitement. She had never imagined a life like this, danger, power, and a connection that went beyond understanding. Yet something deep inside her stirred, a fire that matched the mark on her wrist, a fire that promised strength, courage, and perhaps something more. As they descended toward the village, the artifact safely in hand, the sun rose over the horizon, casting light on the path ahead. The shadows of the past were not gone. The dangers were not over, but for the first time, Alara felt ready. She was ready to face the challenges, ready to embrace the power within her, and ready to stand beside the Alpha King, whose presence had become both a comfort and a challenge she could not resist. The forest behind them whispered in the wind, and the mark on her wrist pulsed softly, a living reminder of the destiny she could not escape. The journey was far from over, but Alara knew one truth with certainty. The fire within her and the bond with Kale would shape the fate of the kingdom, and perhaps, in ways neither of them yet understood, their own hearts. The castle sat under a blood-red eclipse, its towers casting long, dark shadows over the kingdom. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind seemed hesitant, as if holding its breath. Alara stood at the edge of the throne room, the artifact in her hands, the mark on her wrist glowing with steady, bright light. The shadows that had haunted Kale's ancestors for generations had grown bolder, feeding on fear and doubt. Now, they threatened to consume the kingdom entirely. Kale appeared beside her, his cloak dark against the dim light of the torches. His expression was calm but tense, the Alpha King poised as always, though she could sense the weight he carried. Every choice, every command carried the fate of the kingdom on his shoulders. And now, that fate rested partly in hers as well. "You feel it, don't you?" Kale asked quietly, his eyes scanning the shadows that slithered along the edges of the throne room. Alara nodded, her fingers tightening around the artifact. "Yes, the mark, it's trying to guide me. I can feel the power, but—" She hesitated. "It's so strong, I've never felt anything like it." Kale's gaze softened. "That is why I brought you here. You were never meant to hide. You were meant to face it, to command it, to save what is ours." Her heart pounded, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the strange, unnameable pull she felt toward him. She had faced shadows and dangers before, but this was different. The throne room, the artifact, the very air seemed alive with ancient magic, testing her, demanding her courage. The shadows began to move closer, their forms rising from the darkness, eyes glowing like coals. They were the spirits of Kale's ancestors, bound by the curse that had haunted the kingdom for centuries. Their whispers filled the room, accusing, angry, and filled with sorrow. Kale drew his sword, its steel gleaming with an unnatural light. "Stand beside me," he commanded. "Do not falter, trust in your power." Alara nodded. The mark on her wrist flared brightly, and she felt a surge of energy rush through her, filling her with a strength she had never known. She raised her hand, and the light from the mark extended like a shield, pushing back the shadows. The spirits hissed and recoiled, but they did not disappear. "You can do this," Kale said, his voice steady and strong. "Do not let fear rule you. Let the mark guide you, let it speak through you." Alara focused, closing her eyes, feeling the fire of the mark burn not with pain but with purpose. She opened her mind to the energy, letting it flow through her, through the artifact, through every corner of the throne room. The shadows screamed, twisting and writhing, but the light did not falter. Kale fought with precision, moving through the shadows like a storm, cutting through the darkness, protecting her when a spirit broke through her shield. Together they moved as one, him with his skill and strength, her with the fire of her mark. Time seemed to stretch, the battle lasting hours though it might have been minutes. Every pulse of the mark, every swing of Kale's sword pushed the curse closer to breaking. Alara could feel it, the magic of the kingdom responding to her, guiding her, trusting her. And she realized something profound. The mark did not just belong to her. It belonged to the kingdom, to Kale, to the very destiny they shared. Then the shadows concentrated into a massive, dark figure, taller than any man, its eyes burning with the fury of centuries. It spoke in a voice that echoed through the throne room, shaking the stone walls. "One must fall," it said. "One life to free the kingdom, one to bind the curse forever." Alara's chest tightened, fear gripping her. She looked at Kale, whose expression was fierce but calm, determined yet unwilling to show the worry in his heart. She knew what the shadows meant. One of them would have to sacrifice themselves to break the curse. Kale's eyes met hers. "We will face this together," he said. "The mark will guide us. Trust it and trust me." Alara nodded, feeling the warmth of his presence steady her. She raised the artifact, and the mark on her wrist blazed like the sun. Light shot from her wrist, merging with the energy of the artifact. The dark figure roared, striking at them with a force that shook the ground. Kale moved to shield her, but she realized she could no longer hide behind him. She had to stand fully, as the mark's power demanded. "Now!" she shouted and focused every ounce of energy, every thought, every heartbeat into the mark. The light exploded, filling the throne room with a brilliance that made the shadows scream and shatter. The dark figure writhed, twisting in impossible shapes, then finally dissolved into nothingness. The curse broke, and the shadows that had lingered fell like mist. The silence that followed was profound. The throne room was empty of shadows, yet filled with the warmth of dawn's first light. The kingdom had survived, the curse was broken, and the mark on Alara's wrist pulsed gently, no longer burning with threat but glowing like a steady flame. Kale stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved the kingdom. You saved us all." Alara's knees felt weak, but she stood tall, trembling. She had never imagined this power within her, had never imagined herself capable of such strength. And yet, she had done it. Not just for herself, not just for Kale, but for the people who would live in peace because of her courage. Kale reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "And yet, you were never alone," he said, his voice low, filled with a depth of emotion she had not heard before. "I was with you always, and I will always be." Her chest tightened at his words, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something she could not yet name. She realized that in the fire of the mark, in the battle against the shadows, in the moments of fear and courage, something had formed between them. A bond forged in light and shadow, in danger and trust, in power and vulnerability. "You believe in me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kale's gray eyes softened and he nodded. "I do, and I always will. You are not just a bearer of the mark. You are my equal, Alara, in power, in courage, in heart." Her heart raced, and she felt warmth spread through her chest, mingling with the gentle glow of the mark. For the first time she felt fully seen, fully understood, and fully connected. The dawn broke fully, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the throne room. The kingdom was safe, the curse broken, and the bond between Alara and Kale stronger than ever. She looked at him and he looked at her, and in that silent moment, words were unnecessary. They had faced darkness together, and they had emerged stronger. The artifact, now glowing softly, was returned to its place in the castle, its magic no longer a threat but a promise of protection. The mark on Alara's wrist pulsed gently, a reminder of the fire she carried and the bond she shared with the Alpha King. Kale extended his hand to her, a gesture simple yet profound. Alara took it, feeling the warmth of his grip, the strength of his presence, and the certainty that she was no longer alone. "Together," he said, his voice firm, steady, filled with a quiet power that rivaled the very light of the mark. "Together," she echoed, her own voice strong now, steady, filled with the courage she had discovered within herself. The castle, the kingdom, and the magic that had once threatened to consume them now stood as witnesses to their victory, to their bond, and to the promise of a future shaped not by fear, but by trust, courage, and love. As they walked from the throne room, the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting light on a kingdom reborn. The shadows of the past were gone, the threats defeated, and the fire within Alara burned not with fear, but with hope. The journey had been long, dangerous, and uncertain, but in the end the mark had guided her, the Alpha King had stood by her, and the kingdom had been saved. And as they stood together, hand in hand, Alara knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as one. The mark on her wrist glowed softly, a heartbeat in the light of dawn, a symbol of power, of courage, of connection, and of the fire that could never be extinguished. And for the first time in her life, Alara smiled freely, knowing that she had found not only her strength but her destiny, and perhaps even her heart.